Welcome back to Sociology 226. This is Patricia Hill Collins, video 2. In this video, I've got 3 tasks. First, I want to look at the positive contributions that Hill Collins makes in Black feminist thought. Following that, I want to explore the idea of intersecting oppressions and intersectionality. This will involve looking to the work of Kimberlé Crenshaw. Finally, I'll get you ready to do your 2-paragraph response. Let's do it. Whereas in the past video I contrasted Smith and Hill Collins, focusing on critiques, here I will look at the 3 major contributions that I read in Black feminist thought. They are the consolidation of the Black feminist tradition, the concept of the outsider within and the rejection of either-or thinking, and the focus on intersecting oppressions. I'll deal with each in turn. The book's first major contribution is the consolidation of Black feminist thought. Collins was not simply trying to make a mess of the white feminist tradition. Yes, she did that, but it isn't simply a book that talks about oversights. The first major thing that Collins does do is to assemble various instances of Black feminist thought together. There is no single or final account of Black feminism, says Collins, but there are threads that flow together. We find extensive quotation of Angela Davis, the poetry of Audre Lorde, the famous 19th century Black feminist Sojourner Truth. The Black feminist tradition is alive and well, and it did not start in 1990. The aim is not only to find a philosophical or sociological analysis of the situation in which Black women find themselves, but to isolate the cultural standpoint from which power and resistance have unfolded, even if they didn't take the forms that Marx and Foucault would explore. The first major contribution of Hill Collins in this work is to show us that Black women have spoken about power, authority, and exclusion in important ways, and we can find a coherent expression of their situation should we do our homework. Next, the concept of the outsider within. Patricia Hill Collins aims to explore how power and authority do not simply follow the binary paths we find in the, quote, logic of oppositional difference between men/women, fact/opinion, oppressor/oppressed, and so on. These are the dualisms that have ruled the dominant order in Western society and continue to rule in feminist frameworks that do not adequately challenge it. We have to look at how the act of inclusion itself is an outcome of power relations, and about how mere presence does not necessarily lead to inclusion. What are the costs that one must bear in order to be included in a racially dominated order? What costs must Black women bear to be part of the feminist tradition? Hence the understanding of the outsider within. The young Black feminist Collins found herself in when she was attending Brandeis. Her inclusion wasn't a zero-sum game of having made it or failed to do so. Not either/or, she argues, rather both-and. Moving between the binary pair of winners, losers, and men-women is crucial for the third contribution made by Collins. That would be the concept of intersecting oppressions. Here we find Collins' matrix of domination, which refers to the coexistence of power and privilege. In the quote you see here, Collins is addressing the simultaneous penalty and privilege possessed by white women. You can also think about the simultaneous penalty and privilege of your white, male, disabled professor. The point: we cannot simply think of power and privilege as opposed, says Hill Collins. They always coexist. Hence, both and. I think a really important aspect of this is the 2 frameworks of power that we found in Foucault. Recall in my lecture I talked about the 2 kinds of power, sovereign and disciplinary. One was the power of the king, the other one microscopic power that flowed through all relations. Well, Hill Collins asks us how well the move from one to the other explains the place of Black women. Who, she asks, is most often subject to the explicit power of the law? You needn't look too far to newspaper headlines to find the answer. There is a racialized aspect to this, passed over in Smith, and certainly not emphasized in Foucault. We cannot lose sight of oppression as oppression. But, and this is crucial, we can't come up with a single definition of oppression, singular. We have to look at overlapping systems of power and authority, inclusion and exclusion, and how individuals are situated therein. This she calls intersecting or interlocking oppressions, plural, what would come to be included in the term intersectionality, though Collins was not the one to coin it. Black feminist thought proved to be so important as it transformed both the sociology of race and the sociology of gender, and is still frequently cited today. While the first edition of Hill Collins' book does not use intersectionality as a concept, it took off soon after. So in the second edition, there is a significant focus on the concept. While Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term, intersectionality, the idea that oppression is multifaceted is certainly found in Collins' book. Most importantly for us, it involves a discussion of intersecting oppressions. The idea that oppression doesn't exist is a simple A-B process. Power and powerlessness are not simply a one-way street. We turn then to Kimberly Crenshaw. As I told you, Kimberly Crenshaw is the first to coin the term intersectionality. However, she's on a road well-traveled, particularly by the work done by Patricia Hill Collins and the long line of black feminist thought that she chronicles in her important book. This should not, however, cause us to overlook the work that Crenshaw has done in her Demarginalizing the Intersection paper, looking to legal case history and showing the consequences of multiple forms of marginalization. You should read this paper. No summary can do it justice. I'll give you a sketch, but it will only be a sketch. Let's turn to the paper in detail. In the last video, I explored Dorothy Smith's argument about the woman's standpoint, singular. A focus on a single standpoint puts forth what Crenshaw calls a single-axis framework for addressing inequality. Crenshaw argues that the single-axis framework is present in anti-discrimination doctrine, case law, and then-dominant feminist theory. That is, each of these spheres tends to take a single variable to represent each of those people within a constituency. We have disabled people, we have women, we have black people, we have men. Each of these constituencies is granted a particular framework and a particular place in discrimination law, in case law, and in the academic exploration of their situation. Thus, internal forms of inequality are overlooked for the single variable that dominates the group. Single-axis frameworks force individuals to pick one attribute versus another, and in doing so, overlook oppressions that exist within those constituencies. I'll show you why this matters legally using one of the examples Crenshaw uses in the piece. The situation in DeGraff and Reed versus General Motors was this. 5 women brought a suit against General Motors who hadn't hired any black women before 1964, and who, in 1970, had fired all the black women working there in a seniority-based layoff. The plaintiffs argued that this was discriminatory under the American Civil Rights Act, and that they were discriminated against as black women. However, the court gave a summary judgment for General Motors, arguing that, no, these women were not discriminated against because they had hired black men, and there was some in management, and they had hired and promoted white women. Because General Motors had hired women previously, white women, and black people, men previously, black women were denied the ability to claim discrimination from the company. It is not simply that black women are intersectional because they are black plus women, but because they are also lumped into other groups, in this case, white women who were hired by General Motors, and this single-axis reduction denies them the capacity for group status, and thus the discrimination based on that particular status. The point isn't just focusing on people of multiple identities. It is on showing how that multiplicity puts them at a disadvantage when judged by a single-axis framework. It is an explanation of how group inclusions and exclusions can be and often are oppressive. She suggests, exactly as Patricia Hill Collins does in Black Feminist Thought and the contained paper, The Outsider Within, that a single-axis framework, or one that doesn't take seriously the matrix of oppression, is one that is readily apparent in feminist theory. In each case, by causing the experience of oppression to follow a single framework, we lose the very voices, experience, and potential to aid the people who need help the most, facing multiple modalities of oppression. Here, then, we come to the term intersectionality. A lot of people use the term, but often it gets removed from its original context. Crenshaw suggests, as you see on the slide, that the metaphor of the intersection comes to describe exactly how the multiplication problem comes to be. Consider an analogy to traffic in an intersection, coming and going in all 4 directions. Discrimination, like traffic through an intersection, may flow in one direction and it may flow in another. If an accident happens to be in an intersection, it can be caused by cars traveling from any number of directions, and sometimes from all of them. Similarly, if a black woman is harmed because she is at an intersection, her injury could result from sex discrimination or race discrimination. The long and short of it is that single-axis frameworks are not suited to the internal exclusions that can come up from the emergence and institutional support of the multiplication problem. This is really important. As formulated here, the problem of intersectionality is not that people don't have enough identities. The problem is that they're forced to pick between those identities to their detriment. Let me give you another example. Consider the case of the Dewey Decimal System, through which all books in the library are categorized. I've put the call numbers for 2 books I searched for this very video. And this is the map of the 3rd floor of the library you get when you click the Show the Floor Plan link in the online catalog. So, though I was looking at the same author for each piece, using the same concepts in each of the books, I was forced to walk across the floor of the library because we have a single-axis filing system in the Dewey Decimal System. You can either write books on feminist theory and sociology, or you can write books on the sociology of race. No matter how many topics you address in a particular book, you've got to pick one or the other. No matter how many books are written on race or gender or ability or whatever, the existing framework perseveres. If a book is about all of these things, it still has to go in one spot. Here, there is work that must be done by anyone trying to put these 2 or more frames of reference together, given the single-axis framework for filing and reading books. Add all the multidisciplinary scholarship you want, but this is the way the books are shelved. Again, like the intersection metaphor, this emphasizes the problematic nature of the single-axis framework. Thus concludes this lecture given by a white guy from Saskatchewan on intersectional oppression. Now it's your turn. In 2 paragraphs between 5 to 8 sentences in length and with reference to the readings, 1. Explain the difference between intersecting identities and intersectional oppressions. 2. Give an example. Don't use the example of the library.